Today, we welcome back our returning guest, Tanzy Ward, who's a scholar, book author, educator, antique jewelry dealer, and historic preservationist. Her book publications include Hidden Legacies, African Presence in European Antiques, and Unsung Portraits, Anonymous Images of Black Victorians and Early 20th Century Ancestors. Her second historical nonfiction book, Unsung Portraits, was selected as a 2022 Contingent Book List Award for historian authors. Tansy's passion for Black material culture and heirlooms has presented her with the opportunity to be featured in critically acclaimed exhibits, including Yale University's 2022 show, Allegories, Renditions, and A Small Nation of Women. Tansy's connoisseurship training includes the Ashford Institute of Antiques, and she's a proud member of the Ashford Associate Membership Program and the American Society of Jewelry Historians. Her expertise and scholarship have been featured in various decorative arts and jewelry publications, including National Jeweler.
Welcome back, Tanzy. Since your last appearance on the Art Elevator podcast, you've published another book. To start off, can you tell us about your inspiration and process of writing your second book?
Sure. So historically, Black Americana has had a very negative tone to it, but it's a lot of false representation of Black Victorians and early 20th century Black people. So I wanted to start collecting and preserving and talking about the accurate portrayals of Black Americana. And so that includes, the antique photos that our ancestors took when they were going to the photography studio or Children's Day or whatever event, even if it was just in front of their house. That's true Black Americana. It represents an accurate portrayal of Black people, not the negative caricatures and stereotypes that were forced onto them as this acceptable ideal image of what Black Americana is. So oftentimes when it comes to antique photos, especially ones that are Reconstruction era, the 19th century, early 20th century, they may not always have names attached to it. We know that their descendants are out here. It could be any one of us that could be related to them. So that's usually why I named it anonymous images, because those images, they didn't have any information such as the person's name. Now, sometimes when it comes to certain photos, they have the photography studio's name. Like you can see like the state and the city and the name of the photographer's studio. But oftentimes, unless someone wrote on the back of a cabinet card, whatnot, it's anonymous, it's unidentified, but their stories still matter. So I wanted to emphasize that. And I'm on a current long-term project where I'm updating the narrative and the accurate image of Black Americana.
Wow, yeah. And something I really resonate with in your scholarship is how you actively engage with these artifacts of self-representation, like you were describing in portraits, in fashion, in jewelry, to illuminate and give voice back to individuals who haven't always been included in historical scholarship. And what is your philosophy about being a conduit to steward the perspectives of these unnamed ancestors as you describe them in your book?
Yes, I'm just so grateful to be a gatekeeper. I consider myself a gatekeeper because these photos, they have loved ones and descendants that are still alive, but oftentimes, for whatever reason, they're no longer in the collection of the family, or the descendants might not even know that they exist. There's a fabulous photo of their great great grandparent out there in the Victorian era. And all of these photos are from my personal collection in my second book. And I think it's such an I'm very grateful and thankful to be preserving these photos, because I think that years later, when you have anthropologists and historians who emphasize the Victorian era and 19th century, 20th century history, these photos still need to be around so people can see this is how our ancestors were truly. They were very distinguished in their poses and their elegance in their photos. And I really appreciate them for they utilize the camera lens to combat negative stereotype, whether they realize it or not. And I think a lot of them did. That's why they posed a certain way and dressed really nice when they were photographed. And I just feel like it's a blessing for me to be able to preserve these photos and be one of the gatekeepers who preserve these photos, because each generation needs a gatekeeper. We have a lot of our elders who they're getting older and they're not going to always be here on earth to preserve these photos. So in my opinion, being a gatekeeper is very important. It's very vital. And I think that I'm just so honored to be one of the gatekeepers that preserve these photos and, passing the torch to the next generation, caring about these photos. I always say, people, please preserve your family photos and learn about them as much as you can, because there are times when I've heard people say, well, after me, I don't know what's going to happen to them. So they end up donating them to a museum or some type of archives that emphasizes historic Black photography. And that's good. That's good. But I think that it's also important for people to also be the gatekeeper in each generation to preserve their family photos. But if they do end up being somewhere that the descendants may not know that they exist, it's people like me who like, okay, I'm going to preserve these photos. I'm not going to try to like resell them or anything. I want to preserve them and have a growing collection that honors my ancestors and the real images of them.
I think what's really interesting is, yes, you're preserving the photos, but you're adding back in a narrative that was silenced or not heard in the way it should have been. And so it's more than just preservation, it's bringing a new life to these ancestors and their stories, and how the story of the world can be told from so many different perspectives. So I see it as like, yes, you're a preserver, but you're a storyteller as well.
Yes, yes. And what I really love about how your second book came to be is that your role as a collector was essential for the creation of it. And a lot of times people think of being a collector as it's just acquiring a lot of things to look at or so they can show them off. But you've really grounded your collecting identity in this mission of unearthing a different narrative and showcasing it. And so I love how it helps expand how people can think about collecting and how they can use that role as a way to make a positive impact on a topic or an area of history that is really important to them, and that they can make a positive contribution into unearthing more of that history. So it's such a beautiful hybrid of collecting and scholarship in your career. I'm a fan. And another thing that I think is really cool about your work is that you're incredibly gifted at utilizing platforms like Instagram for positive educational impact. And if anybody isn't following Tanzy on Instagram, they should be. We'll have her account in the show notes. You create this beautiful content that also shares hidden stories. And so, as a mid century modern lover, I always really adore your modern Black glamour themed posts. Can you tell us more about how your work has expanded into new historical eras beyond the Victorians that you've primarily concentrated on in your scholarship?
Yes, great question. So I've also expanded to early 20th century, even though my specialty is Victorian era and early 20th century, such as Art Nouveau and Edwardian era and Art Deco era. Mid-century Black glamour is so important when it comes to the accurate amount of representation. Oftentimes when I went on Instagram, I noticed that there are a lot of old Hollywood era type pages that are full of amazing photos, but they really don't have like a lot of extensive amount of photos that represent Black people. They may have like, Eartha Kitt or Dorothy Dandridge or someone, maybe one or two photos sprinkled in there, but it's mostly white. And I noticed even when it comes to everyday people back in the mid-century era, people just dressed up. They love to dress up. So all of us have photos of our grandparents dressed really nice in the 50s and 60s and 40s, because that's just how it was. And I was like, well, all these photos, and I don't really see that often on Instagram. And then there are a few Black pages ran by Black people that they emphasize that, but the primary representation when it comes to old Hollywood glamour and mid-century glamour, it's still quote unquote whitewashed. So I'm actually starting to collect more mid-century photos of Black people, and I noticed that almost all of them that I've purchased and I've collected from different collections and whatnot that I just really treasured. I see like box purses with beautiful dresses that somebody's grandparents had on, and I love that. And I want to see more of that on social media. And there are a few pages that emphasize that on Instagram, but it's not enough, And I think that when we talk about Black, or Hollywood period, we need to also talk about Joyce Bryant, Ruby Dee Moore, people that I don't feel like they're emphasized enough when it comes to Hollywood glamour in mid-century. Even though my primary focus is Victorian era and early 20th century, so that also means the 20s as well and whatnot. I love mid-century fashion personally. I love the box purses. I love, the brooches and pins. I'm so glad that's, trending now. So that's something that, when it comes to preserving different eras, I think that I am getting more into also thinking about the future, like, you know, in less than 50 years, 1940s will be antique. We have to think about what's going to be considered antique in the future. So it's going to extend eventually to the retro and early mid-century era. So I definitely think ahead when I'm thinking about certain things that I collect, certain photos and certain material culture.
That's really wise. Noticing these gaps in kind of the record and then collecting when you have the opportunity to access materials. Because sometimes as things become more collectible, they're very, very hard to find and preserve. So that's really smart.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I love that. And just to speak to your Instagram account, is just one of the most beautiful ones I've seen. I mean, everything you do, everything you touch just turns to gold. It's so gorgeous. I enjoy reading all your LinkedIn posts as well. So again, if anyone's not following on Instagram or LinkedIn, go there. You are missing out. I mean, you can tell how much time and care you put into each flat lay or each image or each staging, and then your personality in there as well brings it to life.
Thank you so much, Larissa. I really appreciate that. It really warms my heart to know that people actually, like, I love the engagement. People actually read my articles and read the captions and are very interested in it. I'm like, oh, wow, like, this is like my tribe of people who, like, how when you have your own you're in that type of like audience or tribe of in Instagram. You feel like, okay, people like what I like. The engagement is so natural and just so it makes you want to continue to post more. And that's what I primarily use my platforms for is education.
It's brilliant, and it just cuts through a lot of the noise out there with its beauty.
Yes.
What inspirations are on the horizon for your future projects?
Even though history is my background, also sociology, one thing that I'm also interested in is the emotional and mental support for children. So clinical psychology actually is what I'm actually going back to school for because I want to definitely continue to work with children. I currently work in the educational field now with children, and I noticed that in the classroom. I think that's very important that they have that adequate amount of emotional and mental support with one teacher in the classroom, it could be kind of challenging because kind of like everything to that child in the classroom in that moment, the counselor, the teacher, sometimes the nurse. So I'm very interested in that aspect when it comes to the mental health and well-being of children. So that's one thing that I'm definitely interested in. But a lot of it connects, like, even people, like people are from our ancestors with what they dealt with in the past when they were going through those lawful injustices and like how it impacted their health and children's health. So that's something that can be connected to that type of field and learning specialty. And then also when it comes to history, changing the curriculum when it comes to history. I know oftentimes recently it's been a lot of books that have been abolished and, African American AP courses and whatnot. And so I just think that right now it's very important for me to really immerse myself in the educational field in different aspects. So, I'm definitely very excited about that. I'm actually going back to school for my alma mater, St. Leo University. So online. So shout out to St. Leo, great online learning. And so just going to continue to immerse myself in what I'm passionate about and trying to leave a positive impact on children when I'm in the classroom and just also through my educational material as well.
Wow, you are one inspiring woman. That is amazing.
Oh, thank you. You ladies are inspiring too. I'm so such a fan of both of you all as well. But thank you. I appreciate that.
Education is such a powerful tool for change, isn't it?
It is in multiple aspects, like, whether it's history, it's mental health concern and whatnot. It's just also just being there and then offering your positive vibes and affirmations to a child in the classroom. I've experienced that and it's really inspired me. Suppose I was like, I gotta keep going. I gotta keep doing this because it was like it's not the most easiest job, but I will leave home. I will leave there and be like, wow, thinking about what the child told me and stuff. So it is very inspiring.
And it
And
does so perfectly with your scholarship because that's also about uplifting these individuals and what they created and the beauty of how they fashioned their lives. And so it's that full cycle of inspiration, both in the children you are working with now and then those unnamed ancestors whose legacy you're uplifting.
Yes, I agree.
We've actually touched on that topic. It just keeps coming full circle back to this topic in a few of our episodes now, which is that power of healing that comes from engaging in a creative process, be it creating yourself or collecting or engaging in any kind of creative play. Does that ever come into conversations when you're working with the kids?
Yes, definitely. I personally feel like the different styles of learning needs to be more emphasized in education. And so oftentimes a lot of things that I'm already interested in and I work on comes up, like history time, talking about some of the great Black literature figures and different things of that nature, and encouraging them to like a particular subject that they may feel like, okay, well, it was boring how we learned it, but it's not necessarily boring. It's just something, just different, learning styles that a child may have. So that actually comes up, like everything is, you're right, it's full circle. And then it's an opportunity where I'm like, here's a book that I wrote that I want to definitely start emphasizing that too with children, like getting them more involved in history and social studies, because I think oftentimes it's about how it's taught and not necessarily what is taught. Even incorporating different African American or just African aspects of history when it comes to certain events that we talk about, like the Tea Party, or just like different things that's happened in the Revolutionary War. A lot of times that they may not know that there were Black figures that played a significant part in that, or just different aspects. And you're right, it all comes full circle.
That is beautiful, Tansy. Thank you so much for coming back to speak with us on the podcast. It's just always a delight to hear what you are creating, and we're really excited for all the things you're going to create in the future.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure whenever I connect with you, Sarah and Larissa. And I'm very honored today to be a part of this. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us today on the Art Elevator podcast. And for any of the links to Tanzy's Instagram account, LinkedIn, all of these other materials you can find in the show notes. We'll see you next time.
Bye.